I'm Carla Reeves, and this is Differently. Whether you feel stuck in survival, navigating a change, or seeking more for your life, may this podcast be your weekly nudge to take a risk, to build a life that is uniquely bold, authentic, and in alignment with your deepest values. After a decade of coaching individuals from corporate leaders to creative artists to multi-million-dollar CEOs, I'm convinced we are far closer than we realize to what we deeply desire, and it's a willingness to do differently that can change everything. My coach suggested I read a book on boundaries. To be honest, I dismissed the idea at first, thinking, I'm pretty good at boundaries. For some reason, that word boundaries feels overused in the self-help world, and I think boundaries often feels like closing myself off, and that never felt quite right. Something about the word didn't feel good inside of me until I read the book Boundaries by Henry Cloud and Townsend, and now I have a completely different lens to see the world. And I want to share some of my favorite takeaways with you today on the show. I think what resonated in this book is that it landed in my heart as truth. It was a refreshing look at boundaries. It was boundaries, yet differently in a way I had never seen before, that equipped me to take a closer look in my own life at where a lack of boundaries is limiting my freedom. Here are a few of my favorite takeaways from this book, and I'm going to read to you right from the book. Number 1, any confusion of responsibility and ownership in our lives is a problem of boundaries. Number 2, in the physical world, property lines are easy to see: fences, signs, gates, walls, and they give the same message. This is where my property begins and ends. In the spiritual, unseen, or intangible world, boundaries are just as real, but harder to see. Intangible boundaries define your soul, and they help you to guard it and maintain it. Number 3, boundaries help us guard our heart with diligence. We need to keep things that will nurture us inside our fences and keep things that will harm us outside. Number 4, our responsibility for freedom. Knowing what I am to own and take responsibility for gives me freedom. If I don't own my life, my choices and options become very limited. We are responsible for our thinking, feeling, planning, allowing, what you will not allow, likes and dislikes, responsible for who you are and who you are not. Number 5, words communicate where you stand and give people a sense of your edges. Your words communicate the rules of your yard. And I loved this one. God never gave us the power or the right to control how others respond to our no. Number 6, boundaries are not walls. We are not to wall off, but to be one, with boundaries that are permeable enough for passing and strong enough to keep out bad. And I love this. Appropriate boundaries don't control, attack, or hurt anyone. Now I truly understand that while I may not label it boundaries work, setting healthy boundaries has always been a vital part of the work I do with clients. Boundaries are required to build a life you never have to escape. To be elevated, equipped, and engaged in your life, you need to have boundaries. When we're doing work together to help a client calm their mind, boundaries come into play because you have to take responsibility for what you allow to hang out in your mind. When we're working on restoring a sense of self and getting some of your own freedom back, this means that you have to apply boundaries and fire yourself from old jobs, or ask for what you want and need, or address where you're saying yes when you really mean no. In the Boundaries book that I'm sharing, he also shares that when you can say no as freely as yes is when you actually have freedom. when I'm working with clients to lighten their load so that they can focus on the things that are really important to them, they have to know what is theirs and what is not theirs. And they have to often stop taking on making others happy or managing the thinking and behavior of others or picking up the work of others. When you're building a life intentionally and one that you don't have to escape, boundaries come into play with guarding your time, your energy, and your heart. They come into play so that you can listen more inside instead of outside. What I'm exploring recently in my own life after reading this book is where I say yes when I mean no. Because I feel people so deeply and so much, boundaries are I'm seeing more opportunity for healthy boundaries in protecting my own energy and letting go of responsibility of others where my love or my desire to help gets tangled in places that are outside of my true domain of responsibility. And this usually happens in places where my heart is most open and vulnerable. Thank you, Henry Cloud and Townsend, for shining a light on the true need and purpose of boundaries to set us more free than we can ever imagine. I hope my takeaways inspire you to go grab this book and take a new look at how boundaries differently can set you free. Hey, thanks for tuning into this episode of Differently. I hope it stirred your thinking, and I invite you to take one inspired action from something that stood out to you. If you want to hear more conversations like this, be sure to hit follow on your favorite podcast app. And if this episode could impact someone you know, please help us spread the word and pass it along. Remember, new episodes drop weekly. See you next week.